With that history in mind, a perspective now on what's at stake today for India and Pakistan and some of the other players in this conflict. Michael Kugelman is the Deputy Director of the Asia Program and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and a foremost expert on India and Pakistan. Things have cooled somewhat now, but can you explain first the timing, why this crisis is happening now?
Well, it all goes back to an attack on Valentine's Day. There was a terrorist attack in India-administered Kashmir, and it was the deadliest attack in Kashmir for many years. It was also the deadliest attack on Indian security forces in many years. More than 40 Indian soldiers were killed, and so that made it quite likely, even obvious, inevitable, that India was going to strike back, which it did. It engaged in an airstrike across the contested border and into Pakistan proper, which is a pretty big deal. And then Pakistan decided to retaliate by launching its own strike into India. And at that point, that's when those of us that watch this region really had to start worrying about some type of war, which luckily did not break out. But it all goes back to that deadly attack on Valentine's Day. And that's what it was. It was the fact that a terror group based in Pakistan with ties to the Pakistani state carried out one of the deadliest attacks in India-administered Kashmir for years.
But given that this conflict has gone on for decades and there have been flare-ups, over the course of that history, why now? Why would that terror group initiate that kind of attack now?
Well, I mean, there's several reasons for it. One is that the group that actually carried out the attack, it's called Jaish-e-Mohammed, it had been relatively quiet in recent years. Its top leader had been quite ill, is quite ill, and I think that this group felt a need to reassert itself, so to speak, to reassert its jihadist street cred, for lack of a better phrase, and so it wanted to show that it has the ability to stage a major and extremely deadly attack in Kashmir. So there had been other attacks carried out by this same group in the weeks leading up to the one that happened on February 14th, but clearly none as deadly as the one on Valentine's Day.
You suggested that the nature of the attacks back and forth may represent a new normal. What are you talking about?
Well, there's a new precedent that was set in this recent crisis. This is the first time since 1971 when Pakistan and India staged strikes on each other's soil. 1971 was when the two sides fought a war. 1971 was many years before either country became a nuclear power. India and Pakistan became official nuclear states in 1999. So what this suggests is that India and Pakistan are now perfectly comfortable engaging in military force under the nuclear umbrella. And so in effect, they've demonstrated that they're perfectly comfortable climbing up the escalation ladder. And the higher you climb up the escalation ladder, the more likely you are to have some type of nuclear exchange down the road. Now, I don't want to over-dramatize things here. I don't think there's going to be a nuclear exchange. But even if the chances of a nuclear exchange are remote, the higher you climb that ladder, that escalation ladder, the more the chance that there could be one. So that suggests to me that whenever the next crisis happens between India and Pakistan, and it will happen eventually, it could be even worse than the one that we just had. Each side may be willing to exchange, may be willing to engage in multiple strikes instead of the one that we had in each case this time. The more military force that's used, the more you have to worry about escalation, and the more you have to worry about the threat of a nuclear exchange.
Some have suggested that perhaps on the nuclear issue that this conflict may be more of a concern than, in fact, even North Korea. Would you agree with them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know of any other case in the world where you have two countries that are bitter rivals that live next door to each other and are neighbors and have nuclear weapons. I don't think there's any other example of this anywhere in the world. And unfortunately, if there's a place in the world where you could look to the possibility of nuclear weapons being used, I think the subcontinent is really the only place where that is a viable, even if remote possibility. I think with North Korea, certainly we have to worry just because of its nuclear capacities and the general volatilities of the nuclear state itself. But I really can't imagine us having to worry about those weapons being used. But here you're looking at two countries, literally eyeball to eyeball, live next door to each other with their disputed border. They fought multiple wars. They have nuclear weapons, and they were willing to use military force under that nuclear umbrella, which again shows that the possibility for more serious crisis next time around is very strong, with the nuclear factor looming very large.
Pakistan also recently arrested a number of individuals affiliated with terror groups and extremist groups. We also saw them return the Indian pilot who had been captured after his plane was captured or went down. How much should we read into that? I mean, is Pakistan trying to lower the temperature?
Well, I think that, well, yes, on one hand, Pakistan's decision to release the Indian pilot it had detained, did provide an off-ramp for a de-escalation, and it was really that move that led to the crisis being de-escalated. But the separate matter of the militants, of Pakistan cracking down on militants, it's detained several dozen members of terror groups that shut down some of their facilities. That's a good thing, but it's not necessary. I don't think we should be getting too optimistic just yet. This has happened before. Pakistan has cracked down against militants before. What makes this time different is the quantity, the huge numbers of militants that have been arrested. I think that Pakistan is doing this because it feels the pressure from the international community. It has an economic crisis it's going through right now, and you know, there is the chance that it could be punished economically by a specific group called the Financial Action Task Force, which monitors terrorist financing. If that group concludes that Pakistan has not done enough to deal with terrorist financing on its soil, it could blacklist Pakistan, which would make it very difficult for Pakistan to do international banking and to get foreign investment. That's the last thing Pakistan's economy needs now. But at the end of the day, Pakistan still has an incentive to maintain links to these terror groups because it's always seen these groups, like Jaish-e-Mohammed, the one that staged the attack in Kashmir, it sees these groups as assets, as state assets, as useful assets, as tools of policy to be used to push back against India in ways that Pakistan's conventional military forces cannot, because its conventional military forces are inferior to those of India. So I do fear that even though we're seeing these crackdowns now, you know, a few weeks from now, once the headlines have gone away and the cameras have gone away, Pakistan could quietly ease up and essentially revert back to the situation that we've always had, where it lets a lot of these militants and these groups live free in Pakistan, where they pose a direct threat to India.
You mentioned the financial group and sort of the pressure of the international community, but who are the players beyond the borders of Pakistan and India who are actually making a difference here? Or are they?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, the United States has been looked to as a country that can come in and be a crisis manager and really come in there and try to mediate tensions when they get to a crisis level. If you look at past history, the U.S. has taken a hands-off role when it comes to the Indian-Pakistan dispute. But when there have been wars, when there have been serious crises, the United States has stepped in and quite successfully managed to diffuse tensions. The thing is, though, the dynamics are changing because India has always been opposed to the idea of any type of external mediation because it fears that would essentially lead to a situation where there would be pressure for the two sides to come talk and have a dialogue. Now, that's a good thing in of itself, but India fears that there would be a dialogue in which it would have to be willing to renegotiate the issue of Kashmir, the disputed region. India thinks that's a done deal. Pakistan wants it to be renegotiated. So India fears that external mediation could actually be a big risk. And I think as the U.S. relationship with India intensifies, that may make the U.S., Washington, less likely to want to intervene quite as much, which I think could be somewhat of a scary thought. You know, beyond that, China is also a key player because of its close friendship with Pakistan, but it stayed quiet during the last crisis. And then maybe a few other players like the UN could be seen as possible crisis managers. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, this comes down to India and Pakistan. If they're going to work their problems out, they're going to have to do it themselves. I don't think now is the time to expect much progress, especially because an election is going to be coming in India in just a matter of weeks. So we'll have to see what happens after the new Indian government takes office in May to have a better sense as to what the next steps could be for India-Pakistan relations.
That was going to be my next question. Put Indian politics into this picture now, and India's stance in this latest crisis, and how politics has affected that.
Well, I think that India's election is another reason why it was inevitable that India was going to stage a military response to the attack in India-administered Kashmir claimed by a Pakistan-based group. In India, when it's campaign season, it plays well politically to be tough on Pakistan, and there is no way that India's government could have sat on its hands and faced this experienced this provocation in this horrific tragedy in Kashmir, one that was provoked by a Pakistan-based group with ties to Pakistan, and not do anything about it. And I think that's also why we had this crisis that went on a bit longer than one may have expected, even after the Pakistanis decided to release the detained Indian pilot that did defuse the crisis, but not before India engaged in some firing along the disputed border with Pakistan. And so India, really did not have a big interest in letting this crisis end quickly. But that said, I think what's striking here is that the ruling party in India, it's a Hindu nationalist party, the BJP, I think that it actually benefits from this crisis. The ruling party had been struggling, it had been increasingly vulnerable, and unemployment numbers have been going up very high, which is very troubling for the ruling party. The opposition Congress Party had won several state elections in previous months. So, really you could look at this crisis as an electoral gift to India. The government's been able to look to a rally around the flag effect. Its decision to strike militarily in Pakistan was very popular in India. And then, you also have a situation where it can very easily get out there on the campaign trail and talk tough about Pakistan, which again plays very well. So, with this election coming up in the next few weeks, I think that the ruling BJP party's prospects for re-election have strengthened significantly.
Mr. Kugelman, thank you very much for your expertise on this.
Thank you. Great to be with you.